innovation, story, depth, combat, world, quests, nostalgia. These are all factors that will contribute to the showdown of the decade between two giants of gaming history, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild versus The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. It's time to take apart, still technically related to hardware, will be used as points of argument, even though it poses as a disadvantage to the older game. So now, let us begin the gaming showdown of this. Along with hordes of adoring fans comes hordes of adoring reviews. This point is going to be pretty darn close because both games have received nearly perfect scores across the board. That's 98 out of 100 from GameRankings and 99 out of 100 from Metacritic, which was 10 out of 10 from EGM, 40 out of 40 from Famitsu, 5 out of 5 stars from GamePro, an A from Game Revolution, 10 out of 10 from GameSpot, 10 out of 10 from Game Trailers, 10 out of 10 from IGN, 9.5 from Nintendo Power, and 5.5 from RPG Gamer. Now, on to Breath of the Wild. From Metacritic, with a 97 out of 100 being rated for the Switch version, and 96 out of 100 10 from Edge, 9.5 out of 10 from EGN, 5 out of 5 stars from Eurogamer, 40 Ocarina of Time's only one sub-perfect score. This point still goes to Ocarina of Time, receiving, as before mentioned, a 99 out of 100, and Breath of the Wild receiving a 97 out of 100 for the Switch version. Coming down to a difference of literally 2%, Ocarina of Time takes home this first point. Argument 2. The combat. The combat systems between the two games are very similar. Ocarina of Time created the lock-on Z targeting system that every 3D Zelda game has copied so far because, quite frankly, it's a genius system. Breath of the Wild, however, further expounded upon the targeting system by adding in motion controls, but not the swing your Wiimote around like a maniac kind. Instead, the motion controls work along with analog controls seamlessly when aiming to either fire an arrow or chuck a weapon at an enemy. Also a new feature to Breath of the Wild, by the way. You can actually use the analog stick to turn your camera large distances and then physically move your controller to zero in to make the perfect shot. And additionally, many see this as a bad thing. I say to them, get over it. I think it adds a great survival and strategy aspect to every fight, even against puny red bokoblins. Ocarina of Time just didn't have the vast weaponry or accelerated targeting systems that Breath of the Wild features. Therefore, Breath of the Wild claims the second point. Argument 3. Story.
Be warned, here be spoilers. Seriously, click the link on the screen to skip ahead to spoiler-free waters in point 4. I'll give ye a few moments to do that.
Link spends the whole game discovering, should you choose to, the story of what happened via his memories of 100 years past was phenomenal. So comparing the two is, again, rather difficult gameplay, while in Breath of the Wild, it's completely dependent on what you, the player, decide to do. I would say, though, that a person progressing normally through Breath of the Wild the first time would finish up the them. From my personal experience and browsing the web thoroughly on this topic, I believe I can safely say that the story of Breath of the Wild, while amazing, is lacking in the way past the initial tutorial, of course, and everything is optional. The nature of an optional story alone lessens impact. That is just a fact. I actually made a controversial video about how I was afraid that exactly this would happen with the story due to open worldness, which I will link Oceans much more effectively, I believe, because you actually play through the events and watch it happen around you. I remember the first time I figured out Ganondorf just used my claiming the Master Sword and opening the door to the Sacred Realm as the major pawn in his plan of evilness, and I remember the emotions that ran through my head, heart, and hands as I gripped that controller and thought to myself, wow, this is something I did. This is something I need to fix. Ganondorf will fall by my hand. In Breath of the Wild, I don't remember feeling emotions this strong towards the characters. Any of them, to be honest. True, there were strong elements of fear, failure, and hope, but they were all just videos you watched about what you did 100 years ago. None of it changed your current purpose, your current abilities, or your mindset, but rather gave you further understanding of your situation. I could go on and on about the comparison of impact of the story between the two, and if I feel like I have to make a separate video about each of these, I will. But for now, with these points I've made, the third one goes to Ocarina of Time. Argument 4. Quests. This one let's face it, is super obvious. Which game has more quests? Breath of the Wild! Which game has more rewards from quests? Breath of the Wild! Which game has more diversified quests? Breath of the Wild!
But Ocarina of Time has farming quests.
So does Breath of the Wild.
Ocarina of Time has horse quests.
So does Breath of the Wild. Literally, with the exception of a few dungeons, of course. This goes, obviously, to Breath of the Wild for the combined main plus side plus point number 4, Breath of the Wild, hands down. Argument 5, items/abilities. So, this one is kinda hard too. At first it may seem that it's also obvious, and the Unbreaking Hero's Bow, and Master Sword, oh, and the Ocarina of Time, and the present, and stopping the flow of time temporarily on an object, oh, and square bombs. Subject as someone who has completed all dungeons of both games without any online help, as is my tradition the first time through a Zelda installment. I did enjoy the dungeons of Breath of the Wild, and no, I'm not talking about the shrines. Yes, I have completed all 120 of them. Those have already been given towards Nintendo Today published this article back in 2014 saying just that. But, sorry to disappoint anyone else who was also wanting that, the dungeons can each be completed in a rather quick setting, taking up a mere, but each one on your first time through most likely takes at least an hour to complete, while the setting will place in your memory permanently. There is build up to each dungeon in Breath of the Wild, but it is nowhere near requires you to complete a mini temple as a child before you even have a chance to enter the actual Shadow Temple. The Spirit Temple consists of completing half of it in the past and half of it in the future, and overall, Ocarina of Time's dungeons were just more impactful and challenging and unique, hands down. So point number 6 goes to Ocarina of Time. Alright, before the 7th and final point, let's look at the score so far. Well, holy furore, we have so far a tie of 3-3. This final 7th point will determine the winner of the gaming showdown of the century. Are you ready? Of course you are, so let's go! Argument number 7, the final point. Impact. Which game has had more impact to the Zelda community, or the gaming community as a whole? A better question would be, how does one determine this? Well, I'm very glad that you asked me that. To determine the impact of a video game simply requires one ingredient: time. And not an ocarina either. I'm talking about in the years to come, we can then fully judge which game left more of a burn in our memory, more of an impact in our Zelda's lullaby beating hearts, more nostalgia for our futures. But wait, I just remembered. We don't have that ingredient. Not for Breath of the Wild. So I can't determine who gets this point because Breath of the Wild hasn't had nearly the amount of time Ocarina of Time has? And therefore I can't determine a winner.
Why in the world would you do this to us, Masked Nintendo Bandit?
Well, quite frankly, because it's fun. And because I have an idea on how to determine the winner based upon impact. Point 7 goes to you. It's your point. And the game you give it to is the winner of the gaming showdown of the century. No pressure. So, that's it, guys. That's the entire argument piece by piece, and as detailed of a measure as I could go in a reasonably timed video, of course. Which game is better? Hey, you tell me. One thing I do know is that both games will forever be two of my most cherished and favorite video games of all time. I, along with you, look forward to the next installment Nintendo will unveil to us eventually, because if it keeps going this way, there's going to be a much greater gaming showdown to come. Anyway, hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this video and you want to see more, stay tuned to Masked Nintendo Bandit by clicking the like button and the subscribe button. I have another video in the works about the relation between Ganon and Ganondorf coming soon. So until that next video, my friends, keep playing Zelda. Masked Nintendo Bandit out. Peace!